Daniel Reyes did not believe in magic, luck, or fate. He believed in checklists, backup generators, and the slow comfort of routine. So when he opened his eyes that morning and saw something small and gold glowing on his pillow, his first thought was not wonder. It was annoyance. He assumed a wire had shorted somewhere in the ceiling panel above his bunk and dropped a spark onto the fabric. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and reached for the object. It was cool at first touch, then warm, like a stone that had been sitting in sunlight. It was shaped like a large fish scale, but heavier than it should have been, and it shimmered faintly even in the dim light of his quarters. There was a soft hum coming from it, so quiet he almost thought he imagined it. He turned it over in his hand. No markings, no obvious mechanism, just smooth gold metal, or something that looked like metal, curved and warm and strange. The outpost he lived on, Station Halden Reach, sat on the edge of a border sector where 3 or 4 different species crossed paths every single day. Traders, diplomats, scientists, and soldiers moved through its corridors like it was any ordinary hub of the galaxy. Humanity had only been part of the wider community for a few decades, still new enough that other species watched them carefully, unsure what to make of a species that built machines quickly, argued loudly, and somehow kept surviving situations that should have ended them. Daniel worked in engineering, mostly fixing life support systems and calibrating cargo scanners. He was not important. He was not famous. He liked it that way. He had a small circle of friends, a steady paycheck, and quiet nights where nothing happened. That was until this morning. He held the scale up to the light again, turning it, looking for a seam or a battery compartment or anything that would explain why it was glowing. Nothing. It simply existed, humming softly, sitting in his palm like it belonged there. He thought about calling security. He thought about calling his supervisor. He thought about just tossing it in a drawer and pretending none of this had happened, finishing his coffee, and going to work like any other day. Before he could decide, someone knocked on his door. It was not the casual, fast knock of a neighbor asking to borrow tools. It was slow, deliberate, 3 exact taps spaced evenly apart. The kind of knock that sounded rehearsed. Daniel froze, the scale still warm in his hand. It was early, barely past the start of the station's morning cycle. Nobody should have known he was even awake. His door had no window, so he could not see who stood on the other side. For a moment, he considered staying silent and waiting for whoever it was to leave. The knock came again, 3 taps, patient and certain. He set the scale down on the small table by his bed, thought better of it, and picked it back up, closing his fingers around it instead. Somehow leaving it out in the open felt wrong, though he could not explain why. He walked to the door, feeling the cool metal floor under his bare feet, and placed his hand on the release panel. He hesitated one more second, telling himself this was ridiculous, that it was probably just a coworker or a station announcement he had forgotten about. He pressed the panel. The door slid open with its usual quiet hiss. Standing in the hallway was not a coworker. It was not station security either. Instead, a tall figure stood with perfect stillness, covered in deep green and gray feathered scales that shimmered faintly under the hallway lighting. Long, narrow eyes studied Daniel with an intensity that made him want to step back. This was a Yathar, one of the older species in the region, known for their formal manners, long memories, and careful, calculated way of speaking. Daniel had seen a few Yathar around the station before, mostly diplomats or traders, always dressed in structured robes, always speaking with measured precision. This one wore ceremonial clothing, not the simple robes of a trader. Deep blue fabric lined with gold trim hung from his shoulders, and a small emblem, shaped like a curled serpent with wings, sat pinned over his chest. This was not someone who wandered the halls by accident. The Yathar's gaze dropped from Daniel's face to his closed fist, where the edge of the golden scale peeked out between his fingers. Something shifted in the alien's expression. It was subtle, barely a flicker, but Daniel had spent enough time working alongside different species to recognize it. It was somewhere between shock and quiet dread. "You are Daniel Reyes," the Yathar said. It was not a question. Daniel's mouth felt dry. "That's me. Can I help you with something?" The Yathar did not answer right away. His eyes stayed locked on the scale in Daniel's hand, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence stretched uncomfortably, filled only by the faint hum of station machinery in the walls. Finally, The Ithar spoke again, his voice lower now, almost reverent. May I come in? What we need to discuss should not be spoken about where others might hear. Daniel looked past him, down the empty hallway, then back at the stranger's face, then at the warm gold shape still glowing faintly in his own palm. Every instinct told him that once he let this man through the door, his simple, quiet life on Station Halden Reach was about to change in a way he could not undo. He stepped aside anyway and let the door slide open the rest of the way. All right, Daniel said. You'd better start explaining. The Ithar stepped inside, glanced once more at the scale, and began to speak the words that would turn an ordinary technician's morning into the start of something far larger than either of them yet understood. The Ithar introduced himself as Voss Kellen, a cultural attaché assigned to the border sector. He sat stiffly on the edge of the single chair in Daniel's quarters, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes rarely leaving the scale that Daniel now placed carefully on the table between them. That object, Voss said slowly, belongs to a creature my people call a kindling. We believe the last of them died out over 1,000 years ago. Daniel raised an eyebrow. A creature, like an animal? Not exactly. Voss chose his words with obvious care, the way someone speaks when the subject makes them uncomfortable. A kindling is ancient, intelligent, and extremely powerful. In the old records, they were protectors, bonded to individuals my ancestors considered worthy. A kindling does not choose its partner based on strength, rank, or bloodline. It simply chooses. No one has ever understood how or why. Daniel glanced at the scale, still faintly warm, even sitting untouched on the table. And you think this thing chose me? A kindling only sheds a scale near the one it has chosen to answer to, Voss said. This has not happened in generations. Many of my people assumed the ability itself had died along with the last of them. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though there was little humor in it. I fix scanners for cargo containers. I don't have some destiny. I think you've got the wrong guy. I would agree with you, Voss said, except that I do not believe I am wrong. And that troubles me a great deal more than if I were. Before Daniel could respond, his comm unit buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. Within minutes, half a dozen messages had come through from co-workers, none of whom should have known anything about the scale or Voss's visit. Word had already started to spread. By the time Daniel left his quarters an hour later, dressed for work out of habit more than any real plan, the hallways of Station Halden Reach felt different. People who normally nodded and kept walking now stopped and stared. A pair of Ithar traders near the market corridor bowed their heads slightly as he passed, which he had never seen them do for anyone. A Velk merchant, usually gruff and dismissive toward humans, called out something about honor and old debts that Daniel didn't understand at all. Not everyone reacted the same way. Some species eyed him with open suspicion, whispering behind hands or turning away entirely. A group of station guards, human and alien alike, kept a noticeably close watch on him from a distance, clearly following orders rather than curiosity. By midday, Daniel had been called into the office of Director Mara Whitfield, the station's ranking human official. She was known for running a tight operation and rarely showing much emotion, but today her expression was tight, with barely hidden stress. "Do you have any idea what's happening out there?" she asked, not unkindly, but with clear urgency. "Not really," Daniel admitted. "I woke up, found a weird glowing scale on my pillow, and an alien diplomat showed up at my door acting like the sky was falling." Mara rubbed her temple. "Half the station thinks you're about to start some kind of galactic incident. The other half thinks you're some kind of chosen figure out of Ithar legend. I've had 3 separate delegations request meetings with you in the last 2 hours alone." "I didn't ask for any of this," Daniel said. "I believe you," Mara said. "That's what worries me. If you had staged this for attention or gain, I could deal with that. This is worse. This is real, and nobody actually understands what it means yet, including you." She leaned back in her chair, studying him for a long moment. "Voss Kellen came to see me directly after leaving your quarters. He wants you to travel to the Ithar homeworld to formally verify what happened. He was very clear that this is not simply a friendly invitation." Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. "What happens if I say no?" "Officially, nothing," Mara said. "Unofficially, I think refusing might insult an entire species during a moment when their government is already unsettled by what's happened. I don't like being pressured any more than you do, But this situation is bigger than station politics now. Daniel looked down at his hands, remembering the warmth of the scale against his palm that morning. Just hours ago, his biggest concern had been a maintenance report due before lunch. Now he was being asked to travel across the sector because some ancient creature, thought extinct for 1,000 years, had apparently decided he mattered. "I want more information before I agree to anything," Daniel said finally. "I'm not walking into something I don't understand just because everyone's suddenly nervous." Mara gave a small, tired nod, something close to respect showing in her eyes. "That's probably the smartest thing anyone said to me all day." Later that evening, alone again in his quarters, Daniel pulled up the station's open archive terminal and began searching for anything he could find about kindlings, about the Ithar's old wars, about the last time a bonding like this had supposedly happened. Much of what he found was vague, old, and strangely incomplete, as if pieces had been deliberately left out. The more he read, the more one thing became clear. Whatever this was, it went far deeper than a strange golden scale and a formal knock on his door. And somewhere out there, unseen and unexplained, the very creature responsible for all of it was waiting. 3 days passed before Daniel agreed to anything. He spent most of that time buried in old archive files, cross-checking anything he could find about kindlings against Ithar history, trying to separate fact from legend. It was slow, frustrating work. Whole sections of the older records had been redacted or simply removed, leaving behind gaps that felt less like accidents and more like decisions. What he did find painted a strange picture. Long before the Ithar had ever built starships, their oldest stories spoke of massive golden creatures who bonded with certain individuals, not chosen by bloodline or rank, but by some quality the old texts never clearly explained. These kindlings were described as protectors capable of incredible power, strong enough to reshape battles, and, in some stories, entire cities. Then, generations ago, something had gone terribly wrong. The details were frustratingly vague, but the outcome was clear enough. A bonding between a kindling and its chosen partner had ended in disaster, sparking a war that nearly tore Ithar civilization apart. After that, the bondings simply stopped. Most assumed the kindlings themselves had died out entirely, victims of that same terrible conflict. Daniel began to suspect otherwise. The records were too careful, too selectively incomplete, to suggest simple extinction. Something about the way certain files ended abruptly or referenced classified addendums made him think the truth had been deliberately buried rather than lost. He brought his questions to Voss during one of their now regular meetings in the station's quiet observation lounge. "You've been keeping things from me," Daniel said bluntly, sliding a data slate across the table. "These records don't say the kindlings died. They say they went silent. That's a very different thing." Voss was quiet for a long moment, his long fingers tracing the edge of the table. "You are correct," he admitted finally. "It was believed, by those who still remember the truth, that the surviving kindlings chose to withdraw entirely rather than risk another bonding ending the way the last one did. They hid themselves, and my people allowed the public story of extinction to stand, because it was simpler and less painful than admitting the truth." "Which is what, exactly?" "That we failed them," Voss said quietly. "The war was not caused by the kindling. It was caused by how my ancestors handled the bonding, by fear, by attempts to control something that should never have been controlled. The kindling did not choose wrongly. We simply did not deserve what it offered." Daniel sat back, absorbing that. It reframed everything. This wasn't simply an old story about ancient monsters. It was about trust broken so badly that an entire species had chosen to disappear rather than risk being hurt again. "So why now?" Daniel asked. "Why would one of them choose someone again after all this time?" "I do not know," Voss admitted. "But I suspect the answer will only come from the kindling itself." Political tension on the station only grew in the days that followed. Some Ithar elders, informed through official channels, expressed open alarm at the idea of a new bonding taking place, fearing history might repeat itself. Messages arrived through diplomatic channels urging that the situation be quietly ended before it could escalate further. Other, younger voices within the Ithar government saw it differently, viewing Daniel's selection as a possible chance to finally repair centuries of guilt and silence. Daniel found himself caught in the middle of a political struggle he never asked to be part of, all while still trying to understand what exactly was happening to him. It was Voss who eventually arranged safe transport to a quiet, uninhabited moon just outside the station's territory, a place chosen specifically because it was neutral ground, away from cameras, politics, and prying eyes. Daniel agreed to go, more out of a need for answers than any real sense of readiness. The moon's surface was barren and gray, lit by the pale light of a distant sun, the kind of empty landscape that made every sound feel too loud and every silence feel too heavy. Daniel stepped out of the small transport shuttle with Voss close behind him, both wearing simple environmental suits against the thin atmosphere. They walked for nearly 20 minutes before Voss finally stopped, raising a hand for Daniel to do the same. At first Daniel saw nothing but rock and shadow. Then something shifted in the darkness ahead, massive and slow, catching the pale sunlight along curves of gold that seemed to swallow the light rather than simply reflect it. The creature that stepped fully into view was larger than anything Daniel had ever seen outside of old films about extinct Earth animals. Long, sinuous, covered head to tail in scales like the one still resting safely back in his quarters, it moved with a strange, careful grace despite its enormous size. Too deep, ancient eyes settled on Daniel from a distance, unreadable and patient. It did not approach. It did not attack. It simply watched him, still and silent, as though waiting to see what he would do first. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to run, to hide, to do anything except stand there in the open under the gaze of something so old and so powerful. But beneath the fear was something else too, a strange pull of curiosity he couldn't quite explain. Voss stood frozen beside him, barely breathing. "It has been waiting," Voss whispered. "I believe it has been waiting for you." Daniel swallowed hard, forced his shaking legs to hold steady, and took a slow step forward across the gray, empty ground toward the ancient creature watching him from the shadows. Up close, the kindling was even more overwhelming than it had seemed from a distance. Its body stretched long and low across the gray rock, golden scales catching what little light the pale sun offered, each one etched with faint patterns that seemed to shift slightly whenever Daniel moved his eyes across them. Its head, roughly the size of a small vehicle, lowered slowly until it was almost level with him, two ancient eyes studying him with a calm, patient intensity. Daniel had expected to feel terror, and part of him did. But standing there, close enough to feel the faint heat radiating off its scales, what he felt most was simple, overwhelming curiosity. "Hi," he said, immediately feeling foolish. "I don't really know what you want me to say here." Voss, several steps behind him, made a small strangled sound, clearly startled by how casually Daniel addressed the creature. The kindling, however, did not react with anger or offense. Instead, its head tilted slightly, almost like a curious animal studying something new. Then, without warning, something pressed gently into Daniel's mind. It wasn't words exactly, more like feelings and fragments of memory, shared directly rather than spoken. He staggered slightly, and Voss reached out to steady him, though his eyes never left the enormous creature in front of them. Daniel closed his eyes and let the images come. He saw glimpses of a distant past, ancient cities built of pale stone, other kindlings moving among crowds of Athar who greeted them not with fear, but familiarity. He felt grief, deep and old, tied to a memory of fire and screaming, of a bond broken by fear rather than malice. He felt centuries of quiet isolation, hiding in places like this one, waiting, watching, wondering if such trust could ever be offered again without ending in disaster. And beneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, he felt something like hope, small and cautious, directed at him. Daniel opened his eyes, breathing hard, his mind still echoing with what he had just experienced. "You didn't choose me because I'm special," he said slowly, understanding dawning as he spoke. "You chose me because I wasn't scared of you the way everyone else would be. Because I was just curious." The kindling's eyes seemed to soften, if such a massive, ancient creature could be said to soften at all. Voss stepped forward carefully. "This is remarkable. In all our records, no bonding has ever begun this way. Most stories speak of grand ceremonies, formal declarations. This is simply a conversation," Daniel finished for him. Before anything more could happen, the quiet moment shattered. Bright lights cut through the dim landscape as two armored transport ships descended rapidly, kicking up clouds of gray dust as they landed nearby. Figures in heavy Ithar military gear spilled out, weapons raised, moving with practiced urgency. "Step away from the creature," one of them shouted through a translator device, voice sharp with barely controlled fear. Voss spun toward them, his earlier calm replaced instantly by alarm. "Stand down. This is a sanctioned meeting, authorized through diplomatic channels. Authorized by reckless fools who don't remember what happened last time," the lead soldier snapped back. "The council did not approve this. We're under orders to prevent this bonding by any means necessary." Daniel felt his pulse spike as more weapons turned toward the kindling, and by extension, toward him. The creature, despite its immense size and power, did not lash out or attack. Instead, it curled protectively closer to the ground, almost as if trying to make itself smaller, its ancient eyes flicking nervously between the soldiers and Daniel. It was afraid, Daniel realized suddenly. After everything it had survived, after centuries of hiding, it was still afraid of being hurt again by the very fear it had tried so hard to avoid. Something in that realization steadied Daniel more than anything else could have. "Stop," Daniel said, stepping forward, placing himself directly between the soldiers and the kindling despite Voss's alarmed protest behind him. "You're about to repeat exactly the mistake everyone keeps telling me caused the last disaster. Attacking it out of fear. Is that really the lesson you learned?" The lead soldier hesitated, clearly unprepared for a human standing so calmly in the middle of a tense standoff. "This is not your decision to make." "Maybe not," Daniel said, "but I'm the one it's trying to bond with. And I'm telling you, hurting it now isn't protecting anyone. It's just proving every fear it's been carrying for centuries was right all along." For a long, tense moment nobody moved. Weapons remained raised, the humming of engines from the landed transports filling the silence. Voss stepped up beside Daniel, adding his own voice, urging calm, warning of the diplomatic disaster that would follow if shots were fired here. Slowly, reluctantly, the soldiers lowered their weapons, though their unease remained plain on their faces. Daniel turned back to the kindling, still curled tightly against the ground, watching him now with something that looked almost like disbelief. "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said quietly, reaching out a steady hand toward its massive head. "Whatever this bond is supposed to look like, I think this is it. Me choosing to stay, even when things get complicated." The kindling's eyes closed briefly, and warmth spread outward from where Daniel's hand finally touched its scales, a golden light rippling gently across its entire body. Voss let out a slow breath beside him, and even the soldiers stood in stunned silence as the bond, unspoken but undeniable, quietly settled into place. News of the bonding reached far beyond Station Halden Reach within days. What had started as a strange personal event for one quiet technician quickly became a topic of conversation across the entire border sector, and then further still, into regions of space where humanity barely had a presence at all. Daniel found the sudden attention exhausting. Reporters from half a dozen species requested interviews. Diplomatic offices sent formal inquiries asking about the nature and intentions of the bond. Strategic analysts from various governments quietly speculated about what it might mean to have a species as unpredictable as humanity connected to something as powerful as a kindling. Back on the station, Director Whitfield called Daniel into her office more frequently now, often simply to keep him informed rather than to give him orders. "Command back on Earth is thrilled and terrified in equal measure," she told him one afternoon, sliding a data pad across her desk showing a summary of official communications. "Thrilled because this could mean real influence in a region we barely had a foothold in before. Terrified because nobody actually knows what a kindling is capable of, including apparently the Ithar themselves." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at the crowded inbox on the pad. "I didn't ask for any of this to become a political thing." "I know," Mara said, "but like it or not, it already is. The best thing you can do now is stay exactly who you already are. From what I've seen, that's precisely why the kindling chose you in the first place." Life aboard the station slowly adjusted to its strange new normal. The kindling itself, no longer hidden away on some distant moon, chose to remain close to Daniel, often resting in a large cargo bay that had been quietly repurposed to accommodate its size. Crew members who once whispered nervously in the hallways gradually grew more comfortable, some even greeting the creature by name once Daniel gave it one. A simple name he felt suited its quiet, patient nature, Solon. Solon, for its part, seemed to enjoy the company, often extending its long neck curiously toward passing workers, though it remained closest to Daniel above all else. Slowly, day by day, it seemed to relax further, as centuries of isolation began to ease in the presence of simple, ordinary companionship. Not everyone welcomed this new arrangement. Among the Ithar, the hardline faction that had attempted to stop the bonding on the moon did not simply disappear after their failed intervention. Publicly humiliated and deeply unsettled by what they viewed as a reckless repeat of ancient history, they retreated into quiet political maneuvering instead. Voss, now acting as an unofficial liaison between Daniel and the wider Ithar government, warned him directly about the growing danger. "They have not given up," Voss said during one of their regular meetings. "They simply changed their approach. Public opinion among my people remains divided, and they intend to use that division against you." "How exactly do you use fear against something that already happened?" Daniel asked. "By making people believe it is still happening," Voss said grimly. "By suggesting the bond is unstable, or that the kindling's power cannot be controlled. Fear does not require truth. It only requires uncertainty." Daniel felt a cold unease settle in his stomach at those words, one that only deepened over the following weeks as small, strange incidents began appearing across the sector. Reports surfaced of unexplained energy surges near trade routes, always vaguely tied back to rumors involving the newly bonded kindling, despite Solon never leaving the station during any of these supposed events. Daniel began to suspect the incidents were not accidents. His suspicion grew stronger when Voss arrived unannounced late one evening, his usual calm composure visibly shaken. "There has been an incident near one of our outer settlements," Voss said without preamble. "A significant energy discharge, matching the signature of kindling abilities, has damaged several structures and injured civilians. Preliminary reports are already blaming Solon directly." Daniel's stomach dropped. "That's impossible. Solon hasn't left the station in weeks. There has to be footage, logs, something that proves that." "I believe you," Voss said quickly. "But belief is not enough right now. The hardline faction is using this incident to demand immediate action, framing it as proof that the bond is exactly the danger they always warned it would become. They intend to use this as justification to eliminate the threat entirely, meaning both Solon and, by extension, you." Daniel felt the weight of those words settle heavily over him. Somewhere out there, someone had deliberately staged an attack, twisted the truth, and aimed it directly at the fragile trust he and Solon had only just begun to build. Whatever peace they had managed to find over these past weeks was about to be tested in the most dangerous way possible, and Daniel understood, with growing certainty, that simply proving his innocence would not be enough. He would need to expose the truth before fear, once again, was allowed to win. The days following the staged incident moved fast, and none of them felt safe. Formal complaints arrived from several Ithar settlements demanding immediate answers. Diplomatic channels buzzed with tense messages, some sympathetic, many not. Director Whitfield found herself fielding calls from officials across multiple governments, all asking the same underlying question: was the bonded kindling truly dangerous, and if so, what would be done about it? Daniel spent those days working closely with Voss, pulling together every scrap of evidence they could find. Station logs clearly showed Solon had never left the cargo bay during the time frame of the attack. Maintenance records, security footage, and crew testimony all supported the same simple truth. Yet none of it seemed to slow the growing wave of fear spreading through the sector. "They don't want proof," Voss said one night, exhaustion clear in his voice as they reviewed data late into the station's artificial evening. "They want an excuse. Proof only matters to people willing to listen." "Then we make it impossible for them not to listen," Daniel said. Their answer came from an unexpected source. A junior technician on one of the outer settlements, someone with no political stake in the situation, had recorded partial footage before the explosion, footage that clearly showed unfamiliar military-grade equipment being used to trigger the energy discharge rather than anything resembling a kindling's natural ability. It wasn't definitive proof of who was responsible, but it was more than enough to seriously challenge the official story. Voss took the footage directly to sympathetic members within the Ithar government, risking his own position by openly opposing the hardline faction's version of events. It was a dangerous move, and both of them knew it. Meanwhile, the hardline faction, sensing their narrative slipping, pushed for a formal hearing, demanding Daniel and Solon appear before a full council session to settle the matter once and for all. It was, Daniel suspected, less about justice and more about a final attempt to publicly frame the bond as a threat before growing doubt could unravel their plan entirely. Daniel agreed without hesitation. The council chamber, when he finally stood inside it, was unlike anything he had seen before, a wide circular room filled with representatives from multiple governments and species, all watching closely as Daniel entered with Solon moving carefully beside him. Solon's massive form barely fit through the entrance, and murmurs spread quickly through the gathered crowd. The hardline faction's leader, an older Ithar official with sharp eyes and a commanding voice, wasted no time presenting his case, describing the settlement attack in vivid, alarming detail, insisting it proved exactly the danger everyone had feared since the bonding first occurred. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he did not raise his voice or try to match the official's dramatic tone. Instead, he simply told the truth, calmly and plainly. He explained the station logs, the footage from the settlement, the equipment clearly visible in the recording that had nothing to do with Solon at all. He spoke about the centuries of fear that had already cost the kindlings their freedom once before, and how easy it would be to make the same mistake again if the council allowed fear to outweigh evidence. Then, instead of ending there, Daniel did something no one in the room expected. He turned to Solon and asked, gently, if it would be willing to show the council directly what it was capable of, not through destruction, but through the same quiet connection it had once shared with Daniel on that empty moon. Solon lowered its massive head slowly, closing its eyes. A soft golden light spread outward, filling the chamber, not as a weapon or a threat, but as something closer to a shared memory, offering the assembled representatives the smallest glimpse of centuries spent in hiding, of grief over an old war, and of quiet hope that trust might someday be possible again. The chamber felt completely silent. It was Voss who finally spoke, presenting the recovered footage formally to the council, along with testimony from station officials confirming Solon's whereabouts during the staged attack. Faced with clear evidence and the unmistakable emotional weight of what they had just witnessed, even several previously doubtful representatives began openly questioning the hardline faction's version of events. Within days, the manufactured incident unraveled entirely. Investigators traced the equipment used in the attack back to a small group acting under the hardline faction's quiet direction, and the resulting scandal did far more to damage their credibility than any argument Daniel could have made alone. In the aftermath, something subtle but important shifted across the sector. Other species, who had watched closely to see how humanity would handle sudden, immense power, took notice of Daniel's approach, one built on patience, evidence, and restraint rather than aggression or fear. It did not erase humanity's reputation for unpredictability entirely, but it added something new to it, a growing sense that perhaps humans could be trusted with more than anyone had expected. Life aboard Station Halden Reach slowly returned to something resembling normal, though nothing was ever quite the same as before. Daniel still fixed scanners and calibrated life support systems, still ate lunch in the same crowded mess hall, still argued about maintenance schedules with the same tired coworkers. But now, more often than not, a massive golden shape could be found resting quietly nearby, no longer hidden, no longer alone. One evening, sitting together in the cargo bay that had slowly become something closer to a shared home, Solon lowered its head toward Daniel and gently nudged something small and gold across the floor toward him. Another scale, smaller than the first, glimmered softly in the dim light. Daniel picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hand, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. This time, there was no confusion, no fear, no uncertainty about what it meant. It was simply a gift, offered freely between two equals who had chosen, again and again, to trust each other despite everything working against them. Guess this means we're really doing this, Daniel said quietly. Solon's low, rumbling response was almost like a laugh, warm and familiar, filling the quiet cargo bay as the station moved steadily onward through the vast, watching dark of space.